Chapter 6. Crocodile Capture. Sue and Ricky ran to the railing of the bridge from which their sister had fallen. "Holly!" Sue shrieked, terrified. Ricky peered anxiously over the edge of the causeway into the lagoon. Suddenly the water below them bubbled up, and Holly's pigtailed head popped to the surface. Her brother and sister were relieved. The dripping girl shook her head to get the water out of her eyes and started swimming about. Fortunately, she had on a shirt and shorts and light shoes, so the weight of wet clothing did not bother her. She looked up and saw Ricky peering down at her. "I guess I'm not such a good tightrope walker after all," Holly said. Teasingly, Ricky said, "Floopsy-doopsy was flopsy-dopsy. Your tightrope must have jiggled." "That isn't a rope, Ricky," Sue told him solemnly. "It's a wooden railing." It was a pretend rope, and Holly was a pretend tightrope walker, he explained. Holly swam around in the cool, peaceful water and called out, "This lagoon is wonderful, Ricky. Don't you wish you were in swimming with me?" "I sure do," Ricky cried. "Wait for me, I'll go up and put on my trunks." Then, stopping to look about, he continued, "Say, I wonder why there aren't any people in bathing. It looks super." "I want to swim too," Sue said, looking a little forlorn. She disliked being left out of anything. "No, Susie," called Holly. "It's too deep for you. I can't touch bottom." Ricky started to run to the cottage, then stopped. It didn't seem right for him to leave Holly in the lagoon with only Sue to watch her. As he hesitated, he could hear Holly splashing around happily in the water, and he almost wished that it had been his good fortune to have tumbled in. Just then, the door of a cottage a little further down the bank was flung open, and a woman rushed out. She seemed to be waving to someone, and Ricky turned to see who might be behind him. There was no one in sight. All at once, he realized that she was calling to him. "Out!" was all he could hear at first. Then her voice came more clearly. "Get that child out of the water! Hurry! Get her out!" Above the woman's cries, Ricky tried to reassure her. "My sister's a good swimmer," he shouted. "She's all right." "Holly's having a good time in the water," Sue added. "No!" gasped the excited woman, who by now had reached them and was running toward the railing. "Little girl, come back! It isn't safe in there!" "She knows it's deep," Ricky said, puzzled by the concern of the stranger. "Daddy says Holly swims like a fish." The woman turned and gripped Ricky's arm. "You don't understand. Yesterday, a dangerous crocodile escaped from the circus. People think he's in the lagoon." Ricky gasped in fear. He raced to the railing and called down to his sister, "Holly, come in, quickly, it's dangerous out there." Holly only laughed, suspecting another of Ricky's jokes. Instead of obeying his order, she swam on her back, further out into the lagoon. Ricky screamed at the top of his lungs, "Holly, quick, there's a crocodile in the water!" The little girl caught the fear in his voice and started to swim toward shore, but she did not hurry. It might still be a trick, she thought. Then Holly saw the woman and heard her call, "Swim faster! Swim faster! Hurry, child!" Ricky kept watch of the still waters of the lagoon. Could it be that beneath the calm blue surface there might really be a crocodile, very close to Holly? All at once his straining eyes caught sight of a tiny whirlpool out in the middle of the lagoon. The ripples widened rapidly, and then up through the center rose the hideous head of an enormous crocodile. "There he is!" screamed Ricky. "Hurry, sis! Hurry!" He picked up a stone and threw it at the creature with all his might. Plunk! The missile struck the ugly snout sharply, and it disappeared beneath the water. Sue, at the first alarm, had run as fast as her little legs could carry her to summon her father. Mr. Hollister came at full speed, arriving in time to see the crocodile's head disappear. Holly had finally realized her danger. She was a good distance from shore and put on all the speed she could. But her father, to make sure she would be safe, caught up a life preserver which hung on the bridge. From it trailed a long rope. He hurled the preserver across the water to his daughter, just as the crocodile's head appeared again. "Catch this life preserver," Mr. Hollister called frantically. "Take a good grip and I'll pull you in." The little girl had just looked over her shoulder and had seen the terrifying, scaly head of the crocodile coming toward her. Thoroughly frightened now, she grabbed the bobbing life buoy and held on tightly. Her father pulled her through the water at lightning speed. With a mighty heave, he dragged her ashore. "Hooray!" shouted Ricky, jumping around. Mrs. Hollister, with Pam and Pete, had arrived in time to see the rescue. For a moment, Holly's mother clung tightly to her wet little daughter, kissing her nose in relief. "Oh, Holly, darling, you must learn to be more careful. What a narrow escape." "I really will," Holly declared, and she meant it. Her heart was still beating at double-quick time from the frightening experience. The excitement had brought a group of circus workers running across the causeway. Upon hearing that the crocodile was nearby, they ran for ropes and spikes to capture it, and 4 of them set out from the island in a small motor launch. The Hollisters watched anxiously as the men started their work. 2 of them waded into the water, and one of the men coaxed the reptile toward shore by swishing a spike back and forth on top of the water. As the crocodile neared them angrily, the other man lassoed him around the body. The animal fought desperately, but could not get free. Meanwhile, the men in the launch took the rope attached to the creature's body and prodded him toward the island. When they reached the bank, the crocodile was dragged off to the fenced-in pool where it lived. "Thank goodness that's over," said the woman who had warned Holly. Turning to the little girl, she smiled. "They should thank you for discovering the whereabouts of the crocodile. No one has dared go in the lagoon to look for him." Holly had to admit that her good deed was quite by accident, and she was glad it was over. Smiling sweetly at the woman, she said, "Thank you for warning me." "You were brave just the same, Holly," Pam insisted. Then, looking at Sue, she said, "You were wonderful too. Nobody else thought of giving Dad an SOS. Sue dimpled with joy at her big sister's praise, but a puzzled look came over her face. "I didn't give Daddy anything," she protested. Pam laughed. "I mean that you gave Daddy the news that Holly was in trouble so he could help her." Meanwhile, Mrs. Hollister was insisting that Holly run up to the cottage and change into dry clothes. "We're all going over to Circus Island," she said. Ricky went along with Holly to get a funny clown cap he'd found on a table in his room when they arrived. He had lost his desire momentarily to go swimming. When the 2 children reached the cottage, Ricky found the key, where Mrs. Hollister had hidden it under the mat, and fitted it into the door lock. As he started to turn it, the youngsters heard someone knocking on the door of the next cottage. They looked across and saw a short, stocky man in a bright blue suit. One of his hands was bandaged. Excitedly, they gazed at him. Could it be the dog napper? Leaving the key in the door, they stepped across the lawn hand in hand for a better look at the man. He heard them and turned, his bold black eyes staring insolently. Now they were sure he was the person who had hurt Zip and stolen the French poodle back in Shoreham. "Do you come from Shoreham?" Ricky asked bravely. His face screwed into a frown as the man growled, "Never heard of the place. I'm the dog warden around these parts." "What are you doing here?" Holly spoke up. Somehow she couldn't believe him. "Registering all dogs in the motel, naturally. You got any?" His retort was rudely spoken. The man turned his back on the children as the door of the cottage was opened by a young woman. To Holly's and Ricky's surprise, they noticed that under each arm she held a small white French poodle. The man walked in and the door closed, leaving 2 very puzzled children outside. He's the thief, I just know he is, Holly declared in a whisper. You bet he is, Ricky agreed. Holly, we've got to trap him before he gets away.